The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Luci Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
I just love the way God sometimes injects into us some creative impulse, and we just have to go with it. We have to move with that and move ahead in faith that something good will happen. We don't always know what the result will be.
Luci Shaw is one of the greatest living Christian poets. She has been a pioneer and a role model to generations of other writers. Her poem, The O in Hope, has become a picture book illustrated by Ned Bustard. It was my pleasure to sit down with Luci Shaw and Ned Bustard to talk about their work. Luci Shaw, Ned Bustard, I'm so happy to have y'all on the Habit Podcast to talk about your new book, The O in Hope. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
The whole process has just gone, so fast.
Oh, really? This is something
I'm used to taking, my books taking about a year to come into print. So this has just been super speedy.
Uh-huh. Well, I love this little book, and to me, this book feels almost like the fact that you are asking young readers, or maybe young people being read to pay attention to language itself in this book. Not just here's what the language points us to, but let's talk about the language itself. It just feels like a nice little introduction to poetry. I don't know if you were thinking of yourself as introducing children to the process, Luci, but the way you talk about. Well, I love that page. It says, "Think how we cry, oh, at the round sun rising," and then that idea of that our natural reaction to the wonders of the world is oh. You sort of take that as the center of so much of how we might think about the world, and I just love it. Anyway, that's not even a question. Well,
I just love the fact, that human speech alerts us to things that we might not have noticed otherwise.
Yeah.
And the way the way language communicates and points us beyond ourselves. So, this poem sort of came out of the blue. I was not trying to write a poem.
No.
And I have 4 great-grandchildren.
Really?
So and I'm very delighted to dedicate this book, Theo and Hope, to my great grandkids. So I hope they appreciate that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love the way God sometimes injects into us some creative impulse, and we just have to go with it. We have to move with that and move ahead in faith that something good will happen. We don't always know what the result will be. Yeah.
Luci, do you remember where this book started, or what? You said it came out of the blue. What was the first little image that you grew from?
Well, I was thinking not in terms of images, but in terms of the letter O. And to tell you the truth, this was a couple of years ago, so I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I remember as soon as I got going with it, the language, the words just flowed. It was as if I'd opened a faucet. And, it was just pouring in, and I had to just go with it. I had to obey the impulse. So I think a lot of poetry is like that. We get an image or we see something striking, and we want to share it with other people so that, we're not just alone in that experience. We feel community and like-mindedness and people who are happy about what's going on in their lives. And we're all saying, oh, wow.
Yeah, right.
I think when I think about this poem, we're talking about like where it came from. And Luci said you just had to follow the creative impulse of it. That was for me the same reaction when I was illustrating it, is that the poem just kind of demanded that more be done with it, and that it was so generative and fruitful just in and of itself, that it just led itself to be created.
Yeah. So Ned, your illustrations are sort of cut paper collage.
Collage, yeah.
That is, okay. Although it almost looks, and sometimes it's not torn paper, right? It's you're
well, some of it is torn, some of it's cut. I did a whole combination of that. There's solid paper, there's textures, there's a painted paper. It's it's a whole combination of things.
Do you can you say anything about how you read Luci's poem and said, I know what this needs?
Well, I actually my wife read the poem to me. Leslie's a huge fan of Luci's for I think 20 or 30 years. We've been reading her poetry and just benefiting from it. And Luci's poetry really is what brought Leslie into the world of poetry. She enjoyed it when she was younger, but I was reading her work that really inspired my wife to embrace and dig deeper into poetry as an adult. So one day she just, I guess the poem was online or something, and she's oh, I need to read you this new Luci Shaw poem, and read it to me, and just we both were like, this needs to be a kid's book. It just it just was so it was just brimming over with excitement and visuals.
Mm-hmm. Luci, did you think of it as a children's poem when you wrote it?
No, I thought of it as a people poem.
Yeah. Well, that's funny that you say that, because as I read it, I thought this is pretty heavy stuff. I mean, and not heavy is that's not the right word, but very complex.
Yeah, profound things happening, but it's lighthearted. So it's taking profound things and it's making them, hoping to make them a little accessible, so that people can hear the sounds as they read them, so that the O sounds sort of print themselves in our memories and our vocal cords and the whole of us. So we enter into that moment when a word arrives. Yeah.
I think if you look at, obviously the folks who are listening to the podcast can't look at it right now, but each spread is almost a complete thought. Sometimes the ideas wash over from one spread to the other, but each one is like you could just stay and sit and mull on them for a long time. Yeah. And just there's a lot there to think about.
Yeah. Ned, I kind of interrupted you. I did interrupt you. I'd asked you kind of how you arrived at collage as the way to illustrate this, and I didn't let you finish your answer, I don't think. So
I think I got distracted. Yeah. I mean, the last time I was on the podcast, we were talking about, I think, or you were interviewing my friend, Stephen Roach with his book on creativity. Yeah. And, folks who have seen that, there are some of my lino cut illustrations in there. And then folks who know about my Every Moment Holy project, that's how folks know of me as right. Lino cut artist. And I actually started working on this poem as more of a straight up black and white illustrations, very in keeping with what you would expect of me if you knew my work, and really hit a brick wall. And it was just thinking about this and showing the illustrations to my wife, and she's saying, no, that looks horrible. We kept talking about these things, and then kind of came up with this idea of trying collage. And I think that, it was a great fit. It allowed me to, and I think that my regular illustration style is just a bit too harsh for the poem. Mm-hmm. That it's a soft poem. It's a reflective poem. I mean, Luci writes poetry that has edges. She has the Christmas poem that talks about the incarnation, where for Jesus, something about Mary having to see her son torn, and it's one of those poems that has always stuck with me. But this poem I think it's partly the O-ness of it, that there's this roundness, a softness, and that's what led me to create the illustrations in the style that they ended up.
Yeah. Well, I love the interplay between the words and the images in this book. So, well, Luci, I said a minute ago that this poem feels like a little primer. Your text feels like a little primer or it alerts young readers to how poetry works by asking us to pay attention to the language itself. But I think we could also say it's an introduction to how metaphor works, and how metaphor with a metaphor can become its own engine for writing, for poetry. It feels like you started thinking about the letter O and just kind of pulled every thread you could think of from the its round shape and everything else that's round, and the sound, and all the words spelled with O, and then sort of retied those threads to show us how things connected in the world God made, things that we might not have noticed otherwise. And that
really is how it works. You're drawing in references that appear to you in your imagination, mm-hmm. and then you find the words that express that. But it is part of the creative work of God. Every one of us has that ability in one way or another to take what we've been given and turn it into a meaningful form to communicate with others. And this is the way God works. The whole business of creativity, Ned has it in spades. And to actually have someone read my words and get pleased enough with them to do something about it. Yeah. And all of a sudden, in my computer, this series of amazing images appears. Yeah. This rose like Venus from the waves. Anyway.
Yeah. Ned used the word generative, that your work generated some new work from him.
Well, that's the work of God in us, to generate, to bring it to birth, to make something new. I think you were referring something about entropy, and what I try to do in my life is to reverse entropy. Entropy is losing energy. It's winding down. But, as believers in the creative work of God, we can reverse that entropic process and bring things back into reality in a fresh, new way. Creating, this is what we were created by a creator to be creative.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's really important when I'm talking about generative. I got that word from Makoto Fujimura. He talked about that in his book. And actually, he and I and my wife were at the Philly Art Museum many years ago looking at a Cezanne show. I think it was Cezanne. And we were going through together, and he was contrasting Cezanne with Picasso. And he was saying, well, Picasso's an amazing artist, but his work is not generative. I think, Luci talking about entropy. I think that Picasso's work is entropy. Like it's after you get to that point with Picasso, you can't go any farther. But then you look at Cezanne's work and you're like, oh, I love this idea. I'm going to take this idea and play with it. And I think that that's what Luci and I, we're doing with this book. She created this poem, and I said, this is a great poem. I want to keep playing with it. And I think as Christians, that's the kind of work that we want to be making, that it is something that inspires other people to be creative and to be generative in what they're doing, which, is very much against the solo artist or the rock star artist that's just about me and just what about I make. It's about actually what do I make in community, and how do I share that? How do I reflect the creator in me, and then encourage other people to create because of what I've done.
Yeah. When Luci mentioned entropy, I think of entropy as things getting messier, things getting less organized, which of course it is. But you also put it in terms of getting the energy dissipating. And that generativeness infuses energy, and I really, I'm going to do some more things about that.
Process. It reverses that drain. It's filling up instead of draining away. Yeah.
That's so good. I love it. Speaking of, so we said you were sort of teasing out these threads about the letter O. Both its shape, its sound, its status as a symbol, right? I mean, both as a symbol, the way a letter is a symbol, but also all the other, a wedding ring is a symbol, and the ripples going out in a pond are a symbol, and all that. All those images from the world where we live, as you talk about them in a way that we see some meaning there. It made me think of something that I read in an interview with Malcolm Guite. It was in Comment Magazine, actually, summer of 2021. He did an interview in Comment Magazine, and he said, what did he say? We have been given a whole cosmos to think with.
Yes.
And I love that language, and it I had just read that interview whenever I read your poem, and I thought, that's what this poem is doing. It's showing us we have a whole cosmos to think with.
It's at our, it's at our fingertips. That's why we have sense organs, eyes, ears.
Yeah.
We and bodies that can have sensations that can be turned into words. That's one of the great joys of writing poems, is trying to take sense impressions and put them into words that are going to communicate that sense impression maybe to somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was interested that InterVarsity, there was, I don't know how this all happened. It had to be the work of God. But all of a sudden, Ned's images arrived in my computer, And somehow, I'm trying to remember how this happened. Somebody at Paraclete Press had a connection. Tell me, describe how this happened for you, Ned. How do we get into varsity press?
It is, these are those things I always tell people. I'm a good Presbyterian, but then I have to just acknowledge the Holy Spirit sometimes. And this is one of those times that you're like, there's just no way this should have happened. So I was inspired to make the illustrations from reading the poem. I sent them to Luci, and she sent them to a friend of hers at IVP. Mm-hmm. And as far as I remember, it was like just sharing them, because IVP doesn't do kids' books. This was just sharing them with someone she had worked with there, and got an email back saying, "We love this. And it's a secret. Don't tell anyone, but we're starting a kids line of books. And would Ned and you be willing to have this as a kids book through us?" And Luci wrote back to me, and I was like, well, of course, that's the whole point, is to make this into a book. I just didn't know where it would end up. I just knew it had to exist. Yeah. And so she wrote back, and they were like, oh yeah, this would be great. And this will be part of, and then turned out they were just launching this new line. IVP Kids is this whole new venture that will hit in October, and this was.
So this will be the first of that series.
This will be the second book. This will be the second book in the series, and this is again how God is so good. I was asked if the IVP asked Luci and I if they could have this book. I was very enthusiastic. And then I wrote back and said, by the way, I kind of have another book idea. Would you be open to me pitching that? And I know this is kind of forward since you just asked me to do a book. Yeah, and right. I had been working on a book for like 20 years about St. Nicholas, and just chipping away at it. Initially wrote it just for my children, and pitched it to them. And they said, oh, we love this. Can we have this book too? And that's going to be the first book. So in October, St. Nicholas and the Gift Giver comes out, and then the second book with IVP Kids will be The Owen Hope.
So all of these royalties are going to start rolling in, Ned.
Yeah, it'll be beautiful. It's going to pay off all my kids' college.
That's it's.
I had to work with one of the editors of the InterVarsity, Alyssa Schauer, who was really wonderful to work with, but she. To make it more accessible for parents and teachers to read with kids, she asked me to change some of the words. And, I did that a little reluctantly because, a poem is sort of a thing in itself.
Sure.
And it just assumes a kind of bodily integrity, if you could say. And I'm sure, Nick, Ned, you've had that experience where you don't want to keep playing with something and removing its essence. Mm-hmm. So, but I went along with them because I wanted I wanted teachers and parents to be able to communicate with their kids the wonders of creation. I mean, this is all about creation, and it's all about its essence, and its origin is in God, and it goes back to God. So it's a circular process.
Yeah. That was one of the things that was traumatic, is because the IVP asked Luci to change at least a page, maybe more than that. And I, of course, had already illustrated the whole thing. So it was done. I'm like, I don't want to go back and work on this. Well, okay. Yes, I do really want this to exist. So it was one of my favorite pages we ended up cutting.
Well, can you say more about that page? Can you tell us what that page said, since it's lost to posterity in the book? Maybe we can talk about it here.
It was about it was about the letter O. Guess if that's a surprise. It was about the mirth of the holy fool. I think. Do you remember?
Yes.
Luci?
Yes, that's right. Holy fools. And of course, if you're conversant with history and the kind of holy fool who's like a mendicant who drives, walks around spouting wisdom that it really isn't intelligent, but it's sort of an avenue of inspiration from God. So a holy fool, but it didn't seem to make sense for parents to talk about with their children, so they maybe changed that.
Yeah, I had made the illustration was, and this is obviously no disparity on IVP. We are very glad that they published the book, but I ended up doing a picture of this jolly monk who was in the monastery, and he was writing, copying over books. So it was books and fools. So it had this idea of, here's this guy who, the world would say, why are you spending your time just in a monastery making books? But that, how that is an important thing in the creative process and in just creating good for the world, is that we make things like books. And
when the math doesn't work, you make the book anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah, they even made me change that first line of the poem. Hope. My first line was, hope has this lovely vowel at its throat, and that felt to me like a really poetic line, and they made me change it.
I'm sorry, Lucy. You deserve better.
Well, they wanted something that was accessible.
Yeah, I understand that.
Kids, and that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, you just have to accept that you're talking to creative people who want their creative vision to be,
that's right,
shared with the world. And
it's
still a very nice book and still a very nice poem.
Oh,
we do have these little things that we all hold on to. And
I went to a writer's
is a little monk.
I went to a writer's night, writers in the round, songwriters night here in Nashville, when I'd first come to town. So about almost 30 years ago, and somebody was singing some country song that we all knew. It was either The Gambler or one of those Kenny Rogers songs, and this was and I wish I'd written it down, because it was a line that everybody knows. And this songwriter who wrote the song, 20 years before that, sang the line differently from the way the rest of us knew the line. And I just realized, to him, that's the sort of Platonic form of that song, is the way he wrote it 20 years ago. And the rest of it doesn't matter if the rest of us know the line differently. To him, that's how that song really is. And I guess for you, that little monk is always going to be there, even if the rest of us don't see him.
He will.
Lucy, I want to ask you about something that I read in your book, Breath for the Bones. You said, for Christians to shun, fear, or condemn the arts is as anti-God as atheism.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said you had written, for Christians to shun, fear, or condemn the arts seems as anti-God as atheism.
Yeah.
The creative imagination is expressed in the arts can glorify God and illuminate the human spirit with his truth. That's a very strong statement, that to be afraid of the arts, or what you said, to shun, fear, or condemn the arts, you equate with atheism.
I don't think it's, I think the arts have opened up, and people are more appreciative of the artistic process, and in the way poets and painters and, musicians, how they've been freed somehow to use their gifts and their art without so many legalistic boundaries. My husband Harold and I started the publishing house back in the 70s. And at that point, poetry for Christians was basically hymns, something that rhymed and scanned and you could sing. And we published a series of literary poets, people of faith, but, putting their faith, their understanding the creative God into the words that our own creation can put together, following the image of God as a creator. And that was considered almost heresy at that point. You guys are too young to know that. It was probably not like that when you were growing up, but back then, to be a literary poet was almost sort of off the charts, in a bad way. Yeah.
What year are you talking about, Lucy? That you started?
I think about early 1970s, maybe 72. Uh-huh. Yeah, we started a series of books of poetry by some really well-known and proficient poets like Eugene Warren and Jack Lex. We had a whole series of them. Uh-huh. And we also did literary biographies of people like Dorothy Sayers, who, was a remarkable mind and creative spirit. So, we sort of trying to open up the whole field of literature to embrace a wider vision of God's work through creative people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was very much my experience growing up. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and the world that Lucy's describing, it was definitely my experience as a Christian, trying to find a place where the arts were okay. Like, it was okay to be a pastor or a missionary, but the visual arts and like these things just weren't acceptable. And so, most of my life growing up has been trying to unlearn that. Reading things like Francis Schaeffer and Leland Ryken and, all the different, books on the arts and the faith. That was really, the church just hasn't been there for a long time. And I think that the quote that you shared from Lucy about the atheism quote, I think you can make that case. I think if you look at Genesis 1 and do not see a creator God, you're not really reading it right. And Francis Schaeffer was the one that introduced me to the idea that the first person who was filled by the Holy Spirit was an artist. You had Beziel being told how to make art to the glory of God. And so I think that, in the churches that I've been in, I've still come across that folks who just are really resistant to the idea of creativity in ways that we would see it as being acceptable and glorifying to God.
Mm-hmm. And also the freedom of it, the freedom of creativity.
Yes.
It's not quite as safe as some people.
Yeah.
You're going out to extremes, and you're experimenting, and you're asking questions. And of course, asking questions at that stage in our lives was almost heterodox, because we had the truth in Scripture and in teaching, and we had to stick with that. And I went to an extremely conservative evangelical church back then. And the thing that really opened up the world to me was at Wheaton College. My professor, Clyde Kilby, taught the Romantic poets, and I was able to sort of enter into the minds of poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge, who used such immense imaginative language in their poems. So I think the way, I don't know if you know the name Clyde Kilby.
I do.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Has a chair with his name, and he was a huge encouragement to me. I mean, this is an example of what he would do. He would assign an essay topic that we had to write, and I would write a poem, and every poem, and he'd say, "Wonderful, send that off to the Atlantic tomorrow." So he gave me the freedom to create and to go off on my own little creative journey.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say, he said, wonderful, send this to the Atlantic and then send me an essay tomorrow.
Well, no, he didn't.
He didn't. He just encouraged you in that work. That's
gave me
wonderful. Yeah. Well, great.
Yeah, Clyde Kilby has, he did a lot of writing, and a lot of it has been re-released recently. Folks would definitely warrant looking it up. I think one is called The Christian Imagination, maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he also went, Clyde Kilby went over to England, and he met with Tolkien, actually, when Tolkien was still alive. Of course, C.S. Lewis had died by then. So, but Clyde Kilby also wrote a book about the Silmarillion, Tolkien's magnificent, what epic? Yeah.
Yeah. He wrote about. Didn't you write about Lewis in Narnia? Am I right about that?
Yeah. Yes. He didn't write about Lewis, though. He sort of introduced, a lot of the Lewis literature into our lives. I think he corresponded with Lewis. I don't know that he ever met, but one of the here's a great story. After Lewis had died, a lot of his artifacts and furniture and stuff was brought over to Wheaton College. Right. And I remember the day in the English department office when the wardrobe, it was this huge crate, and we opened up the crate, and there was the wardrobe. And in the wardrobe, we opened the drawer. What's in there? There was this huge greatcoat, tweed coat with deep, deep pockets. And I remember putting my hand down inside of that deep pocket, hoping I could find some lion fur or something. It was a paper clip, but Lewis just opened up, for so many people. The originating mind is part of God's plan for human beings. We're not supposed to be we need responsibility, but we also need to couple that with creativity. So
yeah,
it's a balance. Do you think we're finding that balance now, particularly in the creative arts by people of faith? Is that happening?
I've been thinking about that recently. I'm actually writing an essay on that thought because I think that from my perspective, like I said, growing up in the 70s and 80s and seeing really the church open up to creativity more, I think we have seen kind of a more of an acceptance of creativity in the church and more of an encouragement. I think that what I would assert, and actually I would footnote myself with Jeremy Begbie because I just read something that he wrote about this, that I see in the church that we finally given people permission to be creative, but I think you see a lot of folks who are creative without being rooted in Scripture. Now, I'm not, obviously, if you look at my work or the stuff that Square Halo publishes, I'm not like we have to put a fish on every picture for it to be a Christian. I'm very open to a lot of versions of creativity and where people can go with that. But I think that people generally, I see folks who are embracing the arts, but not doing it with a real deep roots in Scripture. So
yeah, because you go back to the creation story.
Yeah,
we were created to create. I mean, that's the image of God in us. We are created in God's image, and He was a creator. And I love the word poema, which means to create.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that reminder that in that word poema that making, that poetry is a kind of making, and that even if you're just making things with words, you're still making. I think this poema is the same word you would use if you were making anything else. If I understand that word correctly, it just means making, and that a poem is a made thing. I mean, I do remember. I guess I was from a young age was very conscious that books got written by somebody, but for some reason it didn't really dawn on me that movies were made by people. And I remember when I saw Raising Arizona. I mean, I was in high school. It was 1987. I went to the movies and saw Raising Arizona. It was the first time it dawned on me, somebody wrote that. I mean, of course I knew in my head that people wrote movies, but it didn't really dawn on me that somebody who may not have been all that terribly different from me, or at least, put their pants on one leg at a time, wrote that thing. And then they made a movie out of it. And that just made it's so strange that made a big impact on me because I was 17, 18 years old. I was old enough to know better, but it made a big impact on me.
That word you used, it dawned on you. It's like light sort of entered your intellect in a fresh way. And it suddenly showed the color and shape of life. Yeah.
Well, Luci, to answer your question a minute ago about whether we're reaching more of a balance, I grew up in the 70s and 80s too. I'm about Ned's age, a little younger than you, Luci. I don't think, as I was growing up in church, I didn't detect anybody was hostile to creativity, but also it wasn't anything we talked about. And it does seem like we talk about it a lot more among Christian people, theorizing about the arts and faith a lot more than we used to. Or that might be the people I talk about it more. I don't know. Well, we talked about this idea of generativity a while back. And so that leads me to my traditional final question. I can't wait to hear what Luci Shaw has to say about this, but we might start with Ned. The question is, who are the writers who make you want to write, or the creators who make you want to create? So Ned, we're going to start with you, and while Luci thinks.
Yeah, well, for me, and we mentioned C.S. Lewis earlier, and the Holy Ground up at Wheaton, where you can go experience the wardrobe and the Tolkien's desk. It's a magical place that I recommend everyone visiting. But and it's not surprising, but for me, C.S. Lewis is the one who really makes me want to be creative and to think about writing books. And obviously he has the kids' books and the adults, but he's the one that really inspires me to want to write, want to make books.
Yeah. Didn't you tell me something about a hippopotamus book that got you excited?
And when it comes to making kids' books, Sandra Boynton's "But Not the Hippopotamus" would be my inspiration. I think I was very excited when I discovered all of her books when we were having kids, and I think I've read that book 100, maybe 1,000 times, and it still makes me laugh. And I think that that's the sign of a good book. Well, C.S. Lewis said, if you can read a book as an adult and enjoy it, then it's a good for kids as well. Yeah, I think you see that with Luci's book here as well.
I think that's right. I was just about to say that my own self. All right, Luci, who are the writers who make you want to write? Who are the generative writers in your life?
Well, I'm on the same page as Ned. C.S. Lewis. At an early point in my life when I was struggling with faith and had some doubts, and I read Lewis's book, Miracles, and just sort of opened up the whole philosophical understanding of an active God that sort of turns around what we think of as reality. And that reassured me. But of course, all of C.S. Lewis, I have everything Lewis ever wrote, and a lot of Dorothy Sayers. I love the Peter Wimsey stories.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
I read those over and over, and they're just really falling apart, those little books, they're paperbacks. But, there's such a wealth of good writing these days and poetry. And I'm just so grateful that Paraclete Press is willing to publish literary poetry by people of faith.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked, Paraclete recently had a contest, and John Sweeney and Mark Burrows and I were the judges, and we got nearly 100 manuscripts of poetry.
Wow.
That were superb. It was the hardest thing in the world to try and come up with winners, 3 winners. And so we could publish those 3 winners' manuscripts. But I was just so pleased that, Christian people could exercise their creative ability in literature in such a profound way. And it's just, we were created to create. We are in the image of the Creator. Yeah. So his genes are in our bodies and our minds and our spirits.
Yeah, that's great news to hear that there were so many great poems that you had a hard time choosing. But I also have to say, Luci Shaw, that you're a big part of the reason there are so many Christian poets doing excellent work these days. So thank you for the work that you've done. I love this book that you and Ned have put together, and look forward to seeing it out in the world. So thanks for being here.
By the way, I have a new book of poems coming out.
Tell us about it.
January. It's called Angels Everywhere.
Okay.
And I use the idea of angels as messengers. So everything is a little message to me,
Yeah.
From the blue. That's the way it works. And Ned, I'm sure that's true for you too. The messages keep coming.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't wait. Now I know what to buy my wife for Christmas. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, it's not open yet. It's not out yet, but it will be.
Good.
Okay.
Well, Luci Shaw and Ned Bustard, thank you so much for being on the Habit Podcast today. This has been a lot of fun.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.